In this podcast, we're looking at the significance of the resurrection story as told in the gospel accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the New Testament. I have suggested that this is the black box of the biblical story, and you'll see why I call it that in just a minute. Virtually everyone agrees that there was a real historical figure named Jesus. People don't agree on who he was, and particularly on whether the stories that are told about him in the New Testament are true. But virtually everyone, except for I think a few nutcases, believe that there actually was an historical figure who lived in the early part of the first century, who was a Jew, who was raised in Nazareth, and who was put to death under Pontius Pilate somewhere around 30 AD. Whether he was just a nutcase, or whether he was a prophet, or whether he was who he claimed to be, there's a great deal of disagreement about that, but no real disagreement on the real person who underlies the story. Anybody who believes in the historical Caesar, or the historical Plato, or the historical Augustus would seriously doubt that there was an actual personage named Jesus. Similarly, everyone agrees that something called Christianity exists, that it exists today, that it has existed for roughly the last 2,000 years, and that it came into existence somewhere around the end of the first century, beginning of the second century. That it was in fact well established by the beginning of the third century and became the official religion of the Roman Empire somewhere in the fourth century. So there's really no historical doubt about these two issues. The place where the doubt exists is here, between the two. What is it that connects these two issues? What is it that exists in the black box, or in this case the light gray blue box, that joins these two events? Is there any significance between the two of them, any significance about the black box that connects the two of them? Well, the earliest theory about what happened at the end of the life of Jesus is that he was crucified, put to death on a Roman cross, and that he was buried, and that somebody stole his body. I say this was the earliest conclusion because immediately after the body disappeared from the tomb, the soldiers who were set there to guard the body ran to the high priests and said, he's come out of the tomb. And they said, don't say that, don't say that. Instead, say this. And they gave them money and told them that what they were to say was that they fell asleep, and while they were sleeping, someone came, his disciples came, and stole the body out of the tomb. Now this story, of course, is told in the New Testament, but it does in fact chronologically precede the story of the resurrection of Jesus in the Gospels. At this point, the disciples themselves did not believe that Jesus was resurrected. They were hiding in the upper room lest someone come along and crucify them too. But very soon after this, early on Sunday morning, Jesus being, of course, crucified on Friday, early Sunday morning, people began to say, we've seen him, he's alive. He's not dead. He is, in fact, alive. And so the story of the resurrection of Jesus became the second explanation of what was inside the black box. Much later on, someone said, well, maybe he wasn't really dead. Maybe he was just unconscious. And they took him down off the cross, and he revived in the tomb, regained consciousness, and escaped from the tomb and hid himself somewhere. But that was a fairly late theory. So which one really does explain what happened inside the black box in that period of time between the end of the life of the historical Jesus and the beginning of historical Christianity? Well, the idea that he wasn't really dead is hardly a tenable theory, since the Roman soldiers were professionals when it came to execution, and the story says that he was put to death by a squad of Roman executioners, and that, in fact, just to make sure that he was dead, they ran a spear through his chest and confirmed it. One would be entitled to believe that Jesus was really and truly dead, that the Roman executioners didn't make a whole lot of mistakes in those lines, and that theory probably isn't a really good one. The other theory about someone stole his body, similarly, is kind of stretches credulity, because if in fact someone stole his body, who would that be? Priest suggested it was the disciples, and the disciples went around telling everybody that he was resurrected. It's a little hard to understand why they would tell people that he was resurrected if in fact they knew that they had stolen his body and that he wasn't resurrected, unless they were simply deliberately telling a lie upon which they would stake their lives and for which they would all eventually go to their deaths. It's just a little strange to think that they would actually die for something that they knew wasn't the truth. If they didn't steal his body, then who did? And where was it put, and why was it never found again? Also, the story that the soldiers told doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If they were sleeping, then how in the world do they know who came along and stole the body or what happened? And if they weren't sleeping, then why didn't they prevent the theft? Because that was precisely the reason why they were posted there. So, that idea is a little bit hard to believe, a little bit far-fetched as well, which leaves the story of the resurrection of Jesus as being the one that the disciples clearly believe because they staked their lives on it, and all of those early Christians believe because they staked their life on it, that the resurrection of Jesus, which proves that Jesus is who he said he is, seems to be the one story that makes sense about what happened at the end of the life of Jesus. It also explains how Christianity came into existence. If Christianity did not come into existence because a bunch of people were going around saying that they had seen the resurrected Jesus who had risen from the dead, then how in the world do you explain the beginning of Christianity? That once upon a time a group of people got together and decided that it would be a lot of fun to create a story about a resurrection that they knew didn't take place and that was eventually going to cost them their own lives? It hardly seems to make a great deal of sense. So it seems to most people who have looked at this idea that what is inside the black box is the resurrection of Jesus. That's the only thing that adequately explains the connection between the death of Jesus and the beginnings of Christianity. It's the only thing that explains the rise and prosper and prosper of Christianity. It's the only thing that adequately explains the stories that were told. And so for most people, this becomes the historical event firmly rooted in history that validates the story of Jesus and says that he is in fact who he claimed to be: God, Savior, Lord, Messiah.